Hi, everybody. Regina here with Angela and Shalese Heard, aka the Neurodivergent Millionaire. It is, what day of the week is it? It's Monday, right? It's Monday,
Yes.
September 30th, 2024. And we are talking to folks from Woven and WPF Insiders. Shalese is going to share some of her story with us. As a reminder, me and Angela, at least, are not financial professionals. Shalese can do her own disclaimers. But everything we say is educational, entertainment. Speak to a professional if that's what you need. Angela, anything before we hand off to Shalese?
Just for folks that have filtered in since earlier, we're just having folks share in the comments where they're from or where they're at right now, just so we have a sense of where in the world everyone is. And this is going to be just kind of a back and forth conversation. So if folks have questions or comments during the chat, feel free to drop them and we'll be monitoring the chat to answer them in real time. So welcome, Shalese. It's really great to have you here. We connected first through Bryn Conroy, I believe.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
frugality.
from Femme Frugality, and she introduced you to us. I don't know, last year, the year before?
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
she.
yeah. So from there, we learned more about Shalese and get to watch all of her great stuff on Instagram and Threads, and invited her to come chat with Women's Personal Finance today. So
Yeah.
welcome. If you could give just a little bit about you.
So I am Shalese, also known. I used to be known as the Autistic Travel Goddess because I originally started my platform as a travel blog for autistic adults, and now I'm Neurodivergent Millionaire because I realized travel costs money, and that's a barrier with people like myself, autistic, and being able to travel. Money's the biggest barrier. Hence, Neurodivergent Millionaire. In my spare time, I like fashion. I like to go to the mountains. I like skydiving, and I like wine and a good book.
And I
And
would
my
have to say too that our community, especially our smaller communities, so Woven and WPF insiders tend to skew a lot more neurodivergent. So I feel like that is also a really great overlap for us here.
Excellent. That's one of the things that attracted me to you guys, actually, the fact that it was a lot of neurodivergence here in the group. And just a disclaimer, I'm not Dave Ramsey. I'm not a certified financial professional. So take that, make that what you will. Those are my disclaimers.
Yeah. And I think that's, there's a lot of conversations from folks that, um, online we hear a lot of the same stuff from a lot of, different people, but a lot of very, very similar platforms. So it's always great to talk to someone that I think has a little bit of a different perspective and viewpoint than, this is how you continue to make a ton of money and, spend on what you will, and that's the way to freedom. So I think, especially, I don't know, is it like the last year or so, Regina, would you say that it's really seemed to skew more toward you should be able to spend on everything you want, you just need to make more money?
I feel like the last 6 months in particular, it's almost like as more signs of maybe some economic issues are pending in the background and people are sensing that they maybe should tighten up a little bit more, that like the aspirational, inspirational type talk is about how you shouldn't ever need to sacrifice anything. And of course, we're a little bit different because we try to talk a little bit more widely about like the bigger implications and how it's not necessarily about personal sacrifice, but sustainability and being able to have more control over your time and things like that. So, Shalese, I know. So the way we titled this was hospitalized and homeless to wealthy. So I definitely would like to hear more of that backstory and
The long one.
how you got here.
This one, honestly, I struggled so much with this because it is a little bit emotional. I'm not gonna lie. And this is why I'm so passionate about talking smack about the capitalistic system we're in. But it all started when I got out of school. So I went to college like everyone told me to. I grew up poor, grew up, with an unstable home, went to college, got my degrees, got me double master's degrees. only, because I thought that that will change my life, get me out of poverty, only to get these degrees, a graduate degree at that, and struggle to find gainful employment. And as soon as I would find a job, I would get dismissed for some reason that was BS, in my opinion. Like, a lot of times, being autistic, we get discriminated against when it comes to jobs. Like, we get told that we don't fit in with the office culture. And I, for one, I got called into meetings a lot just because I wouldn't socialize with my coworkers a lot. And, it would be things like that that would, as soon as I would get the job, I would lose it. And so I had the bright idea to start my own business. I decided to start off renting my car out on this platform called Turo. At the time, it was called Relay Rides. So I would rent the car out, and I was making money doing that. And I thought to myself, this is a good business move. I can make money, without having to deal with the ableist BS that comes with having a job. And so I was doing well with that. I used that to travel. I used that to fund my lifestyle. And as you probably can guess, because cars are depreciating and because the market, it was known as the Airbnb for cars, eventually it became saturated. Those combined with the declining, depreciating value in a car, business crashed a few years later. I could no longer keep up with it. And with that came a whole slew of hardship. I ended up becoming homeless because I could no longer keep up with my apartment. And because of all the shame there was around asking for help, and there wasn't a lot of support, as far as disabilities, and because I look high functioning to a lot of services, it was hard for me to advocate for myself, and I was not aware of the resources out there. And so I ended up suffering in silence and being homeless, unable to find stable housing. So with that, it drove me into a deep depression. I almost committed suicide, and I ended up getting hospitalized because I was sick and tired of, not being able to make it. I was thinking to myself, I got this education, I got this degree, I did all the things that they told me to do. And yet here I am, homeless, not having a place to stay, not having the things I need. And I just was fed up, and it led me to feeling that way and ending up hospitalized. And when I got hospitalized, I was hospitalized for about a week. I had medication. I had a doctor come and do an assessment on me, and I ended up speaking with a social worker. And what ended up happening was I was offered a year later, because this stuff is slow, I was offered therapy sessions. I was offered, not only was I offered food assistance, but then they made me aware of a housing voucher program that subsidized my housing for a period of time. And in addition to that, I was offered supportive employment. So I was able to take advantage of that time to, once I got settled into the housing voucher program, I was able to use that time to work on my content creation, work on, looking for suitable employment and getting supportive employment. I used that time to try to build for myself, because I looked at it as a blessing to be able to finally have housing I could afford, housing that I'm not teetering on the edge to afford every month. And I didn't feel like I was threatened with homelessness. So me getting that housing voucher really played a huge part in me being able to get myself ahead financially, because it allowed me the mental clarity and the mental space and the option to really think about what I wanted, because I didn't have this pressure on my back to pay $2,000 a month in rent, or to, pay all these extra bills. It gave me the option to think about what it was I really wanted, and to pursue the jobs that I really wanted, and the opportunities in business that I really wanted. And that is how I was able to sit down and write my book, do more content creation, and actually pursue career opportunities that were more suitable. And really what it was, I really seriously think that the difference with that was that alleviating financial stress for me allowed me to be able to have the mindset to really investigate and take my time to find something that was really aligned with me being autistic, something that was really able to accommodate, something that was also able to play at my strengths and not, focus on my limitations a lot. I didn't have to rush and take any job that was bad for me. I could take my time and actually look for something that was suitable for me. And so I learned in this experience that these resources, there's no shame in getting housing vouchers or getting food assistance. Like, there's no shame in that. That actually may be the solution that you need to actually really get yourself going as far as getting on a wealth building journey.
Regina, I feel like you can, relate to some of the like having trouble fitting with a day job and work, because I know that's something that, you know, is a big part of why you pursued, you know, financial independence was not being beholden to systems that didn't really fit.
For
Yeah.
sure. Yep. I've navigated that. I've never directly lost a job for those types of reasons. Mostly it's just been difficult, or hard to manage. But yeah, I definitely relate to not fitting in there and it making things a lot more difficult. So, Shalese, how long has it been since that process started? Like, where are you at now? Um,
So I so I had gotten a professional job once again in my field that I wanted. And, it was involving geology and research. And I ended up losing that due to layoffs. But I can honestly say that I am further along than I was because I have savings, I have investments now. And with that lower cost of living, I was able to save up as much money as I could. And I was able to really push myself ahead, along with the opportunities to do overtime and the opportunities to do, field research and field visits. And those had a lot of like bonuses and a lot of extra money that I could make. And so I was able to use that and put those in investments as well.
Yeah, no, for those who don't know, my day job is in housing and housing affordability, and specifically rental support and vouchers have been something that I've really been focusing on, pushing further to the front of the conversation, because as much as we need a whole lot more housing, a lot of people like need the support now. It doesn't matter if we can
Yeah,
build affordable housing in 5 or 10 years from now, like we
right.
need.
They need it now.
Yeah. So it's kind of the whole give people money and then
Right.
they can get to like a stable baseline. And yeah, Lisa, we at some point keep talking about having a UBI conversation, universal basic income, for those watching who might not be familiar with it. But,
And
go ahead.
yeah, my story is an illustration, excuse me, as to why we need UBI, because it helps you get ahead. Because during the time I was homeless and before I even got assistance, I was working dead end jobs. Like I actually was working things like retail, which by the way is sensory hell if you're autistic. And you're constantly having to multitask. And then I was working these jobs. My paycheck wasn't going anywhere. I was getting paid a little over minimum wage. And the thing is, not only was my paychecks not going anywhere, I was stuck in this hamster wheel where I was so exhausted. I didn't have time to pursue what it was I really wanted. I didn't have time to really sit down and think about being creative, writing a book, being, a content creator. So it's really crazy because it's like when you don't have that assistance and that financial backing, you end up in this hamster wheel that makes it hard to get out. And I'll be honest with you, if I did not have any of these programs, I think I would still be on that hamster wheel, or I would be still homeless if I did not have that. And so, yeah, I strongly believe and I support UBI for exactly that reason, because this whole system is a trap. I am convinced, especially if you're like me, you grew up poor, you grew up without parents who have resources to, gift you a down payment or have a stable home for you. Like if you're like me, it's a whole trap out here if you grew up without resources.
That too, and knowing like the scripts that are going on, people who are coming from less wealthy backgrounds, the jobs and the things parents have done, like you don't learn necessarily a lot of those subtexts and games that are going on in the workplace that are how we succeed, and we think you just work hard and show up, and oftentimes it's much more complicated than that, and that doesn't necessarily help you.
Exactly. And then another thing that I, dealt with too when I was homeless, trying to, work a job to get myself out. It's really a sad reality that even if you're working a so-called professional job, even if that's the case, you really can't get out of homelessness without outside support or assistance. And that's sad to even learn that because, I was homeless and I rented this room, when I first relocated out of town for a job opportunity. I rented this room from, a couple who was renting out a room. And the husband was running the household. He was making all the decisions. And just that whole situation was very degrading. Like, he felt that he can talk down to me constantly. He felt that because he was providing me a home, even though I was supposed to pay him rent, even though I had to pay rent and I paid rent, despite all of that, he felt that he was doing me a favor. And this was in Boston, mind you, a housing market from hell. So, you're in this situation where you're doing the best you can. And then you've got, especially men, a lot of women find themselves in these situations, even if it's not, because this was a business transaction. This was not romantic. But at the same time, it's like he felt because he was giving me a home, because he was in his mind giving me something, that it was okay to talk down to me. It was okay to, you know, be negative and create a negative housing environment, and just kind of every day wake up complaining about something and nitpicking and all of that, just being a roommate from hell. And a lot of women deal with things like this economically because we're underpaid, first of all, and we tend to find ourselves in vulnerable housing situations.
This mimics some conversations we've had in WPF Insiders with a few people. I'm not sure that it's appropriate to name Angela, but does this not sound very similar to some specific stories? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Specifically, the
Yeah.
donut hole of going from like really financially like unstable to like you're making more money, but there's all this stuff. It's it's
Yeah.
you think all of a sudden, okay, well, I got the big girl job, like
Yes.
I have it all figured out. I'm going to be fine. And, and insiders, we have that conversation. I have it with people in my like in-person life, where you can be making a whole bunch more money, but like when you have like years and years of very low income, it's not like you flip a switch and
Exactly.
suddenly you're fine. It's
Yeah.
like, I was talking to a friend the other day. She was like, I have this higher paid job now, and now I can pay for all the things that I hadn't. Like, I can now go buy my period products in bulk instead of having to buy just a pack a time. But that
Yeah.
means that I have to spend the money for the bulk purchase up front. And so, like, so many of those things happen, and your money, goes a lot faster than you would think a
Yeah.
larger salary would, even when you have that jump.
And that's the thing. I was earning a higher salary, but then I still had to recoup moving costs. I had to recoup, a deposit for a new place, which was hard to do when I was paying rent for the room that I was in. And, that was it just felt like, well, darn, I have this big girl professional job. Like, wasn't I supposed to be doing better than this? But that is when, I had to take a step back and realize that sometimes getting on assistance, like, it's crazy to sit up here and say that getting on assistance was actually better for me than trying to work that out and climb myself out of homelessness that way, because I would still be there if I was trying to bootstrap it.
For sure. Yeah. So, I know you have a book you put out. Do you want to tell us about that? I'm curious I know there's a book, but I haven't seen like what the topic is, and I'll have more questions after that, I'm sure.
Yeah. So it is called Neurodivergent Millionaire Rebelling Against the Status Quo. And what I mean by the status quo is this whole system that we're in. Everything is said to be, you have to work this, go to school, get this degree, work this 9 to 5 job, and, be on this hamster wheel your whole life. And I talk about all the ways we need to rebel against it, because also the status quo is about being ableist and being not neurodivergent friendly, forcing us into systems that are ableist. And so I talk about the problem with us getting employment and making money, the obstacles we have to deal with when it comes to stable finances, discrimination on the job, accommodations or lack of accommodations, and, things like that. And I talk about the autistic tax, is what I like to call it, because living on my own, living by myself, because I can't deal with the stress of a roommate, costs more money to live by myself than it does living with a roommate. That's what I call the disability or the autistic tax. And so I talk about these things, the cost of being disabled. And with that, I talk about the problem and then I offer the solution in terms of us pursuing entrepreneurship, looking into assistance, you know, being able to advocate for ourselves, finding jobs that make it easy to advocate for yourself on the job, for accommodations, and even looking into where you live or where you move for a job opportunity, which can make all the difference in the world. Like if you're living in a right to work state versus a union state, that makes all the difference in the world with a job. And I also talk too about my own story, what led me to finally say, I'm done with this. I'm going to write this book. Like at the end, I talk about my story of when I moved up from my first professional job, and I was still in my homeless period at the time. And I called myself going up north to take a job. And I rented that room that I told you guys about, and it ended up just going haywire. And I told myself, never again, never the freak again. Am I putting myself through that for the sake of trying to bootstrap something, doing everything I'm told, getting a job, doing all this, like for what? It's no reward in that. And I'm
So,
not saying you shouldn't work, but I do think it should be a method to how we do
yeah.
things.
So, so you talk about also about being the like financial person for someone that you needed when you were younger.
Yeah.
Like where would you tell someone who's still in the like thick of it? Like where would what do you wish you had been told, 10 years ago?
First of all, I wish I had been told that there's how do I say this? It doesn't make you bad. It doesn't make you a bad person or a moral failure just because you have student loan debt or just because you have medical debt or any type of debt. It doesn't make you a moral failure, because a lot of my problem too was I had punished myself for getting into debt. I was upset about having student loan debt, and I had punished myself a lot for it. And looking back on it, I didn't deserve that punishment, because the main reason I was in student loan debt is because I didn't have a family. I did not have a background that made it conducive for me to be debt free or get free college. So why should I punish myself for that? Why should I punish myself because healthcare, the Affordable Care Act hasn't kicked in yet and I had to get medical debt? So I started to think that, and I realized, I don't need to go without things that I need because of situations that were out of my control. And I wish that I had less judgment when I was younger and someone who put it to me that way when I was younger.
Yeah, it is kind of wild to think that in this country, we talk about medical and student loan debt as being bad, that like that, yeah, you should punish yourself and live, the beans and rice method.
Right.
Um, and there's a balance between, being, smart with your money and making good choices, but then there's also like a balance between that and, having to live like no one else for
Right.
years of like misery and like burning ourselves out for
Don't
things
get me
that are,
started.
yeah, because of that shame of like, well, this
Right.
number is hanging over me and so I have to make decisions that are not good for my health or for my
Mhm. And
well-being
a
along
large
the
part
way.
of my shame was listening to Dave Ramsey. I was an avid Dave Ramsey listener at that age. And his words would just grind in my head a lot, to the point where I just would think to myself, oh, I'm not going to buy groceries because I need to pay debt. I'm not going to buy my medication so I can pay debt. Like, I look back on all the money that I threw away chasing debt that, was not good debt. And I realized I could have done so much more with that money. I probably could have, prevented being homeless had I not listened to Dave Ramsey's advice by throwing everything I could towards debt. And part of it, is me being autistic, in the sense that I get really obsessed with what I hear. So it was an obsession and a special interest listening to Dave Ramsey. I became obsessed with it to the point where it was to my detriment. And so I did not realize at the time to be careful what I listened to and to be careful what financial advice I take in. And I was obsessed with this whole thing about, being debt free, having this freedom to, live a life like no one else. I was so focused on that I didn't see the here and now. And I was so ashamed of my situation. That's what took me all these years to talk about my money struggle. And I've had the idea to do Neurodivergent Millionaire for some years, but I was so ashamed of my struggle, I was too afraid to do it.
I'm glad you're out here now because it's so important that people see people who have made it and people who talk about what those stumbling blocks were.
Yeah.
I didn't think about it much until you just mentioned it, but I wonder if neurodivergent people in particular might be more prone to some of
Yes.
those detrimental behaviors when you're looking
Yes.
at guru type people who have a very prescribed plan.
Mhm.
Because I'm going to say we, because I don't know what I'm not, I'm something. I'm neuro.
Self-diagnosed. Yeah.
The following the plan and like sticking to it, and like if I just follow the steps and I do it the right way, it'll work out. right? Like you can get really obsessed with that. Not
Right,
necessarily the person, but just like they've given me a formula and they say if I follow
right.
the formula, it'll work. Um, and we
Mm,
definitely try to talk about that there's a lot of different options and a lot of different ways to go about things. And
right.
I know for me and Angela, we've partly resisted like really leaning into being big financial influencer types because we want people to understand that there's a lot of nuance, and we think that there's a much bigger benefit in having a supportive community where you're giving a lot of voice, hearing a lot of voices, not just I have one person who I subscribe to who's giving me everything that I need, because it may not work for them.
Yeah. And then I didn't take into account at the time, it didn't dawn on me that the people that were doing their debt-free screens on Dave Ramsey's channel, it didn't dawn on me that these people, first of all, were couples, so they had a double income. And most of them tended to be white, having already had a previous inheritance, the generational wealth that white people have, which is the head start that we as Black people did not have. A lot of these people were not neurodivergent, and they were able to navigate the workforce. These people didn't have the same obstacles that I had. So I didn't even think about that until over the years when I started really thinking about it.
Yeah,
And
well, and a lot of those folks too, like have the fancy house that they can downsize from,
yeah,
have the
right.
two expensive car payments that they
Mhm.
can downsize from, have the like
They
all
were
the things.
over-consuming.
Yeah,
It's easy to
Right,
pare back when you're already living in excess. It's
right.
yeah,
maybe not easy, but like there are
well,
clearly a bunch of things that are very like big ticket items.
They
Like,
have first world problems, is what I like to say,
yeah,
because it's one thing that you've had your Acura, and that you have positive equity in the Acura, and that you're not upside down in it. Of course, you can downsize it to a Honda and be okay.
yeah.
but if you're already driving the $2,000 Honda, like there
Right.
comes a point
Whichever
where,
was at the time.
yeah. So I think that does get, a lot of like we don't give enough credence to that. That, a lot of the advice that gets shared online is, you know, stop doing these things. But if you're already not doing those things or you
Exactly.
can't do those things, you're still trying to compare yourself
Right.
to, that same story and that same timeline. And I think you are onto something about the whole like if
Yeah.
it's very prescriptive, it's easy, especially if you're neurodiverse to like stick to, well, like this is the box and I can live in this box exactly, even when it doesn't work.
Because I had a best friend of mine called me out on it too when she saw me going off the deep end, following that plan. She's like, "You're already not doing these things. What more are you supposed to cut off?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she had a point.
So,
Yeah.
Shalise, if you had somebody, let's say, not somebody who's super down in the thick of it, they're not, without a place to live and things like that, but just somebody who's caught in that kind of trap that I feel like a lot of millennial type people and are in general, where like they said, like you said, you went to school, you got the degree, you can't figure out how to get past the hump, and maybe they're also struggling with workplace dynamics. Like if you had three main points on how to rethink things to try to break out of that, what would they be?
I would say, first of all, I would definitely seek out supportive people in your job search, like whether that be a therapist that can help you with your job search, look over your resume, to look over your job descriptions. And I would also seek someone who, you know, how do I explain this? Like I would actually go to vocational rehab services and actually be specific about finding someone who's familiar with neurodivergence, autism, someone who has experience working with us so that they can help us, think about the jobs that best are suited to us. Which brings me to my next point. Not only should you work with someone who specifically understands autistic people or neurodivergent people, but this may lend you to having to consider other career paths that you may not have considered before. So we're so stuck on thinking, oh, we have this degree in this topic, we should get a job in this field and that side. And that was how I was, I wanted to get a job in public health because I had my master's in public health, and that's just all there was to it. I wanted a specific type of job, and it wasn't happening. I don't know if it's just because I didn't have the connections or if it's because the jobs were turned out to be too social for me. That may have been a combination of both, but then I had to open my mind up to other opportunities that allowed me to be more analytical because being autistic, I'm naturally analytical, I'm naturally methodical in the way I work, and I had to find jobs that allowed me to be able to use those skill sets and not focus so much on the things I lacked. So because I tend to lack, certain qualities that come with being a social worker, for instance, or in public health, those jobs, a lot of them would have highlighted my flaws too much, and it would have made me feel drained trying to work on all of that when I could just work on something that's easier for me, that comes naturally to me. So in that way, you would have to think about other career opportunities you may not have ever thought of before. And another point that I want to make as well is you may have to clear out the noise of people around you telling you what you should have by now, by this age, where you should be, what jobs you should have. And because when you're listening to all the people shitting on you, when you've when you're surrounded by people projecting what they think you should do, it's a distraction, and then it makes you feel bad, and then you end up feeling overwhelmed and hard to focus. So I suggest also watching who you surround yourself with and the advice that you take. If the people giving you advice have not walked in this path, then yeah, you don't need to take advice from them.
Where do people go about finding vocational rehab help?
So there's a few different ways that I've done it. I looked at my state's office for vocational rehab. I also found it through the hospital that I was hospitalized in. When I explained to them what I needed, they set me up with a social service system to where they offered vocational rehab. They were connected also with the vocational rehab center in my state, but they were supportive employment coaches as well that actually worked with me to identify my skills and interest to find employment as well.
Do you
I feel like
need to be in a certain situation to access these services, or are they just
Not
like, I'm
necessarily.
underemployed, I am not in a good work situation, whatever, can you
Oh
just
no,
go and they'll help you?
yeah. Now vocational rehab will help anybody, right off the bat. You don't have to be in a certain situation to get it. I only access the supportive employment through the hospital because of being in the hospital, but you can access the state's version, the Office of Vocational Rehab on your own without any outside assistance.
I feel like I've seen things like this associated with effectively what we would call local unemployment offices, or at least them being a starting point maybe for learning more about it, even if it's somewhere that they need to point you or somebody who only comes in
Right.
now and then.
Now, I will tell you, my unemployment office that I work with directly was not very helpful. I actually found that resource through friends of mine who also were disabled, and they, got services through the vocational rehab. That's how I heard of it because, yeah, my local unemployment office was not helpful whatsoever.
I think that's part of the issue too, is like when you're in the thick of it, trying to like know where those resources are and like where to find things. Because for a lot of folks too, it takes like one place, but you need to know where that one place is. Yeah, Lisa's saying, she worked at a workforce center and not all are going to be as helpful as some. So yeah, it's really, and that's where I think that community piece can be really helpful, is if you can find folks that are in your area, either like physically in your area or in your area of like expertise, like connecting up with people that have some overlap with you to help you figure out like where you need to go and who you should be talking to.
And the thing with supportive employment, the coaches that I work with, I actually had to be very selective with the coach that I work with, because the thing about mental health hospitals is that mental health, at least in my state, it's not necessarily, they don't necessarily know anything about autism. And so I constantly had to ask for a coach who was experienced in autism, because most of them weren't. And so it took me several tries to find a coach who really, was willing to work with me. And it's a real crapshoot with supportive employment though, because some of these coaches, some of them, they're not really passionate about what they do. Some of them are not aware of how to help, and you've got a lot of people that should not be in these positions, and so it can be a crapshoot sometimes.
Yeah. So now, fast forward to today, you're running your social media stuff and like you're really focused on travel and like setting yourself up in a like really great financial space. Like what are you like really focused on right now, and like how do you determine your priorities now that you're out of that phase of your life?
And are you
So
100% on entrepreneurship related to that? Are you all working for yourself?
honestly, ever since my last job, I still have not decided if I want to be full in entrepreneurship. If I do decide to do it full time, it'll just be because out of necessity. But I already know I don't really want to go back to a 9 to 5. I kind of want to do something like on the side, like teaching, continuing to educate part time and do something like that along with my entrepreneurship. Because, yeah, like doing the full time 9 to 5, I don't think that's for me. But I still like the reliability of employment. So I think I would have it on a smaller scale. Um, and with that being said, I do want to take, my content creation full time eventually. I do want to take that. But I know that with the algorithms and with the way that it pays, it's pretty unpredictable. So I don't know the time frame as to when I'll be able to make that a full time gig. I would love to, but I don't know how long it would take me to do that. But
We haven't figured any of that part out on social media
It's
either, so
Well, and that's where I think a lot of the like why you see so many formulaic accounts with all the like
yeah,
really high aspirational, like you do these things, you buy my course, you do this
yes,
specific path and you're going to be successful.
mm-hmm.
And if you are doing things differently, kind of like with a 9 to 5, it
Right.
sometimes can be harder to figure it out because you're not just selling the like perfect dream.
Right. And that's what I found too, because I've tried this social media thing. I've actually been doing social media content creation since 2014, right before I got out of school. But I found that the main reason I think that I have not blown up is because I'm not selling people a dream, because I just can't do that. Even
yeah.
in my book, I'm not going around telling people, oh, just do this and you'll become a millionaire. I'm just telling people simply to change their mindset about what it means to create wealth. Because, first of all, wealth is also a mindset. It's not just about having luxury goods that you see on Instagram. It can be having time freedom, having the freedom to not be a part of an ableist system, to not have to work a job that's toxic, to live in an environment that's suitable for you. It's about choices and options. It's not about necessarily having the latest material items.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, no, but I agree though. It is much harder to get people excited when you're saying that there are things other than the like fancy new purse and the big fancy, all-inclusive vacation and the big fancy house and the big fancy car and the big fancy things. Those are things are like tangible stuff that is easy to sell. And it's also kind of, the same folks that like really get into Dave Ramsey and get to that like debt payoff scream.
Right.
They want to get back to what they were doing just without the debt,
Yeah.
rather than looking at maybe there's a different way to live with a different
Right.
like end goal.
And I've read studies. A lot of those people that, did Dave Ramsey's plan, a lot of them end up back in the same situation, because it's a bit like weight loss, for instance. If you deprive yourself too much, then you end up gaining the weight back because you'll binge eat all the things that you restricted yourself from. So following his
Yep.
plan, you got to be careful, because it's a bit like weight loss in that
Yeah,
sense.
without a true mindset shift, yeah.
Right. And so one thing that is fun, I'm not like, I will never deny how fun this is, like watching your investments grow. It's like a game. Like, you
It
just,
is.
instead of buying bubble tea, you put it in an investment account and then you're like checking to see how much it grew.
Yeah, it's for sure. I mean, that's, we both use Empower. Like I don't check it daily anymore. Regina does.
Lots of
Um,
times a day, some days.
but it is like a different kind of gamification, but like in a way that can be maybe healthier. Um, but also that's where, when the market is volatile, like, do you check it every day no matter how it's doing, or do you check it every day when things are just going up, and then do you not look at it for 3 months if things are
Yeah, what
funky?
do you do, Shalese? Do you look at it every
Honestly,
day?
I like to look at it every day just because I can. I have OCD with that.
Yeah, I
But
look at it whether things are going up or down, and I've been able to. I know that I'm stable enough now, and that's money for the long term, that
yeah,
I don't really respond emotionally to it going up or down. I mean, a little bit. It's exciting to see it go up, and like, oh, that sucks, it's down, but I don't have a strong emotional
I
reaction.
don't actually have a feeling when I see it go down. I don't really have any type of emotional reaction to it.
No,
It's just a little bit like entertainment for me, if that makes any sense. Like it's just interesting to watch.
It feels a little like Monopoly money sometimes, so
yeah,
I
Yeah.
think that helps. When it's not your day-to-day money, that's what your like emergency fund sitting in a high yield savings account is
Right. Oh
for the
yeah.
like, because that doesn't go up and down. That's the like security blanket
Exactly.
money, and then your investments are your Monopoly long-term money.
so I like
Yeah.
how you say, instead of like buying a bubble tea, you like to watch how it grows when it invests. Do you have a good way that you frame that for people? I know sometimes I get kind of, I don't know, I can sound like I'm talking about the latte factor, right? You know that term, Shalise?
Yeah.
Because I will say, like, I often tell people who are early on in their financial journeys trying to develop that mindset change. My personal take is often that I think it's good to cut out as much as you can where you still feel like you're living a good life. And like for me,
Mhm.
my ongoing journey is kind of a matter of like, how much can I cut back and still feel happy and content? Like I like to see kind of how low I can go and then know that I
Yeah.
don't have to stay there, but I'm
The
still
game.
happy. Like it's reinforcing for me.
Right.
But a lot of people are really tied to a lot of those smaller purchases. And some of them do get a lot of value out of them. And I wonder about framing ways to think of that in like being willing to re-explore. Like, can you shift your mindset to investing that for a month? That's what we like to talk to people about,
Right.
doing like 30-day challenges. Change it up for a month and see.
I have so much to say about that. First of all, I actually think I did a post on this on Threads not too long ago. And I started thinking to myself, okay, first of all, do I really need a bubble tea every day? Can I just have it a couple of times a week? Now, granted, I had bubble tea every day when I was homeless and going through, a lot of stress, being in a stressful situation. The bubble tea had calmed me down. So that was me reacting out of stress. But then when I was able to sit down and, not be homeless anymore and actually have time to have clarity, I wasn't craving the bubble tea. Like I noticed I wasn't craving those purchases once I got stable. So a lot of it's mental. When you're going through a lot of stress, you crave impulse purchases. But then when you're stable, you don't crave it as much. So like I said, a lot, like I say 50% of it is mental, getting yourself stabilized so that you don't crave that anymore. And then you ask yourself, you're like, do you really need this all week? Or can you have it a couple of times a week, once a week? I got to the point where I went from having it every day to once a week, once every 2 weeks. And I started thinking to myself, you know what? Am I really going to steal from my future self for this moment of pleasure? And that's just the way I look at it. The money that I spend on bubble tea that I don't need to spend is me stealing from my future self. And I don't deserve that. I deserve comfort. I deserve the best life. I deserve freedom. And I'm not going to steal that from myself just for a few moments of pleasure. And another thing that I like to think about too is, yeah, I'm not going to tell you not to have the bubble tea or the latte or whatever your thing is. I'm not going to tell you not to have it. Have it, but you don't need to have it multiple times every day. You can have it maybe twice a week, 3 times a week at the most. And Another thing too, and this is my belief, having an income, like having significant income does help too, because also when you're very low income and you're struggling to pay for necessities, it becomes hard to, think about the long term, and you're thinking, oh, well, this income's going to go to gas anyway. I might as well spend it on something pleasant.
Right.
But when you have a bigger income, you start thinking to yourself, okay, so all the money I spent on bubble tea, is that really making a difference in my life? Or is that just going to be gas money? And so the question you got to ask yourself is, if what you're spending amounts to something that's major, like if it's a life-changing amount of money where you could have paid off a bill, you could have, paid your rent, if it could have made a major dent in your life, then you don't need to spend it. But if it's something small that's not really going to change your life and it's just nothing more than pocket change that would have gone to gas, then, by all means, get the latte. Just don't do it to the point where it's going to make a big difference in your life.
Yeah, I find too that I get into habits where, I will get used to like getting the office and go get a coffee. And then suddenly I turn around and I'm like, oh my God, it's just become like part of my like daily routine where I'm not actually thinking about it or really enjoying
Right.
it. And it it's amazing, like between like coffee and like lunches out and stuff, it's so easy for me to just get into a cycle.
Mhm.
And a lot of it is like, well, I need a break. I need to go for a walk out of the office. And it's like, I can also just go for a walk around the block. Like, I don't have to
Right.
stop and get the coffee. I can just go for the walk. But I think it's really easy sometimes to just like fall into that rut of doing the like, I do the thing and then I do the other thing. And then it just like is such like an automatic thing that it's not actually bringing you very much pleasure. It's just like
And
part
it's
of
like
your day.
when you're in the trenches, you're not going to think like this, like you need whatever it's going to take to get you to de-stress when you're in the trenches. But when you're stabilized, you got to ask yourself, do you really need bubble tea? Do you really need this thing? Or what is it that you're actually craving? Like, are you lonely? Do you need to talk to a friend?
Mm,
Do you need to get out and see some scenery? Do you just want to get out of the house? You don't need to spend money. You just need to, get some sunshine. That's what
yeah. And it's a lot easier to not need things when you can get them if you need them. I'm not sure that came out right, but like I've noticed definitely like the farther along I get comfort wise, like I have some hoarding type tendencies because I
right.
want to get things cheap and I want to make sure I have them.
Oh yeah.
And the more I know that I can very easily afford something random if it comes up, the less I feel the need to like buy something on sale because a need might come up. So
Right.
I actually, and that's like the minimalism type stuff, right? Where it's like there's a pretty significant privilege in being able to live a minimalist life by choice versus
Right.
not having things because you can't afford them. But to be able to
Exactly.
know that you can get things if you need them, it helps.
And that's my mindset when it comes to clothing. Like I used to be guilty of, whenever I saw a clearance item, just because it's on clearance, I got it.
Yep.
And I don't care if it's marked down from $100 to $5.99. Do I really need it? Am I actually going to wear it? Because if it's just going to sit in my closet, then that's $5.99 wasted. I'm not doing that.
Right.
And, I am self aware enough to know I don't need new clothes. I maybe need, to take a bath or, watch my favorite shows on YouTube. I need other things that are going to entertain me. I don't necessarily need new clothes. And, I love fashion, so I just mix and match a lot of my clothing that I currently have because I buy clothes that are sustainable and last and have that are good quality that I can wear for years on out. And I mix and match a lot of pieces to make it look like I have more outfits than I do.
You and Angela have that in common. I just have a giant closet full of thrift store clothes. But
Like I may buy unique pieces, during the season, but I don't, I don't redo my whole wardrobe.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it really is a difference because if you can only spend $5.99 on a piece of clothing, like you kind of have to buy it when you see it at $5.99, but if you can buy it at 100, you can you can wait.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, Regina, I think there's really something in there too about the when you have the means to buy something, it's easier to pass it up.
I mean, and I've arguably had the means all along. Like I've never really not had some money, even since I was a teenager. I've always been really good about making sure I always had like $100 or $200 aside. I just always had money in case. But it's only been really like in the last year or two that I'm getting better about being able to like pass up a sale. It's taken a long time, and probably maybe like my childhood, like both my parents don't come from a lot of money, so they have their own scripts that they live by. But yeah, it takes a long time to break out of that. So I guess
And
I would love to think more about how we can help people reframe things like you
yeah.
like instead of the coffee makes me feel good, investing that
Yeah.
money makes me feel good, and that can be a habit I do every day. I drop $4 into my investing account and I get to watch it grow. And then can you change your script so that that gives you the same amount of pleasure that you would have gotten from buying a coffee?
And you
And
Which
can
again, coffee, I know, substitute that for anything low
bubble
ticket,
tea.
it's bubble tea.
And Tina made a really good point here. When you lose everything, it makes you become minimalist and more stuff just stresses you out. And I can speak to that 2000% because when I was growing up, I actually, my parents didn't have a stable home for us. And so I remember we ended up losing our home and we lost all of our things. And I guess I'm still traumatized by it because I refuse to own too much stuff. One thing about me, I will never be a hoarder because like have this mindset that if I have too much stuff, I'm going to risk losing it. Like that's just the way I think. Too much stuff puts me at risk of losing it. And so I just rather not have a whole lot of stuff because I think to myself, if ever I lose it, due to a natural disaster or whatever, then at least I won't feel like I'm out too much. And so that's what makes it easier for me to be minimalist because that's just the mindset that I have that if I ever lose stuff again, I won't feel like I lost a whole lot.
It's so interesting how that can skew like far in either direction from a lot of people who've had problems when they were young with losing their possessions or something similar. Like some people definitely lean more towards hoarding and trying to make sure it never happens again. And then you have, I just don't want to have things to worry about and it will never happen again.
And then another thing that I do is because I like to travel, I had this dream of, living overseas, living abroad. And always, every time I think about buying something, I got to think about how that would fit into my dream of living abroad. Am I going to have the patience or the wherewithal to store this item? Um, am I going to feel like storing this? Is it going to be any point to me having all the storage for this stuff when I go overseas one day? And excuse me, if I see it as a burden and too much, then I don't buy it. It helps me keep my mindset in check when it comes to buying things.
Angela, have you read that Swedish death cleaning book? I feel like we should add that to a
No.
list where this made me think of it. Side note on that thought. Well, we're
Yeah.
right at about 5 o'clock, so I want to make sure we have time to look at some of the comments and see if there's anything we want to follow up on. I see you in there, Shalese, so I'll let you skim yourself.
Yeah, and if anyone has anything you want to say specifically or add, but um the best thing about, attending these live is you get to, be in the conversation in real time, which is fun.
Um,
But yeah, I really like the comments about, when you can see how much, be it Tiller or YNAB, two of our community favorites, being able to see how much you're spending on something and something I've not thought about till now, but it would be
yes.
interesting to have like a separate investment account that you funded only with like foregone purchases. So if you skip the bubble tea, you skip that takeout, like if you put that money into like one specific investment account, it might be like really energizing. Yeah, like a swear jar. Having a
That's
like skipped the like the like fleeting pleasure jar investment account kind of
sense a
thing.
new challenge, WPF challenge coming on. Maybe
Yeah.
that'll be our maybe you all are getting a sneak peek right here of like our focus for our new year kind of reset. That could be an
But
interesting
I
one.
like the idea of, you know, it's kind of like the opposite of, you know, when you use Tiller or YNAB and you pull out those purchases so you see them all in just like one place rather than your just like overall big number, it can
Right.
be really impactful. Kind of the same way if you could pull it out of your investments and show like this account is funded only by the things that I have decided aren't important to me. I feel like that could actually be a really encouraging way to put more money aside for your future self. I really love the like focus on, because it's, you know, a lot of the conversation is like around, you know, I want to make sure that I'm, you know, living a good life today, et cetera, et cetera. I can't afford to put stuff away for the future. Well, your future self can't afford for you not to. So,
Exactly.
you know, you really are stealing from your future self, which is really hard,
Right.
especially when things are tight. But, you know, if they're tight now, like you're never going to be younger than you are now. You're likely not going to be more employable than you are now unless you go back to school and retraining and whatnot. But like things are likely not going to be better on the money front in 30 years than they are now.
And then inflation keeps rising. It's not going to stop. I don't believe it's going to stop. And if it does, I will be shocked.
I would just say I think this would be a really interesting thing. My mom quit smoking after 35 years, about 20 years ago now, and she had her no smoking money. Granted, she didn't invest it, but she had it separate and she did fun things that she wanted for herself with that money, and that really helped her quit. Because she thought about, what am I trading? I'm trading dinner with my daughter for cigarettes.
Wow. Wow.
I
Yeah,
feel like we
we'll do
gotta,
something with it. We'll
yeah.
have to think on it, but I like that idea for a challenge for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we are over time now, and I know everybody has things to get to. It was wonderful to have you join us today. This
you
was
so
a really good
much.
conversation. And, you know, this is where, again, nuance and community is really where it's at.
Do you have any parting thoughts or comments, Shalese? And again, Shalese is at Neurodivergent Millionaire on Instagram and Threads. Are you on other platforms with
YouTube
that?
and TikTok as well.
Okay. So if you want to
And
connect.
yeah, and you
And
know,
we'll include links in the description when we get it up on YouTube too. So folks don't have to
like I say
remember.
about rebelling against the status quo wants us down in the dump so that we keep spending, 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 and not having anything for ourselves for the future so that we can keep working for these corporations. That's what they want. They want to encourage us to impulsively spend and not save for our future selves. Why don't we rebel against that so that we can escape this system?
100%. I agree with all of that. All right. Looks like I think we've covered most of the comments. So thank you again, Shalese. Nice to it's not really in person, but as close to in person as many of us get, meet
Oh, thank
you.
you guys for
And
these comments. Thank y'all.
it's also really cool to see comments and how people show up, for our smaller creators. And if you know somebody interesting who's got a really good story, let us know or tell them about us too, because this is what we like to hear and do more, not just like the same creators with the same advice, but we want to hear real people and their stories and their outlooks and how they're navigating, because that is impactful. So thank you again, Shalese.
Thank you so much.
All right, I'm going to hit stop.